Please go ahead.
Good morning to all. Morning to all. Welcome to SOCHM webinar on key employment, labor law related issues and the GST implication thereof arising out of the current COVID-19 situation. I hope you all are safe, staying at home and following the guidelines issued by government on COVID-19. As this pandemic continues to spread at an alarming rate, employers are dealing with exhausting and surfacing workforce management issues. Employers are concerned about the business stability risks, employment related concerns. This pandemic has disrupted economies and business with closure of several manufacturing facilities and supply chain. With the gradual relaxation of the lockdown, this disruption is forcing companies to confront difficult questions such as how will industries handle its workforce? Are layoffs the only answer? Are there any statutory protections that the industry or MSMEs can take resource to in such unprecedented times? Does the states have the right to intervene in the decisions of the private parties? What will be the GST implications on various employment related transactions? To answer these questions, as well as many more, we have organized this webinar today. We have two experts, Ms. Monali Datta, Principal Advisor Legal, and Mr. Suripta Bhattacharjee, Partner Tax Controversies Management and Contract Documentation, who will be delivering these aspects and also take the questions from you after their presentation. So I would just like to briefly introduce both the eminent experts. Ms. Monali is a principal at Advaita Legal, and she has extensive experience in corporate advisory, including merger and acquisition and corporate restructuring. She has advised on a gamut of issues arising out of policies adopted by various companies in relation to contract labors, business integration, and secondment of employees and other relevant documents such as labor compliance manual and HR manuals. She provides complete transaction advisory on drafting, vetting, and negotiation of employment contracts and also advises on a gamut of labor law related issues such as payment and forfeiture of gratuity, contribution to provident fund, and bonus payments to employees. Mr. Suripta Bhattacharjee is a partner, tax controversy management and contract documentation at Advaita Legal and has more than 15 years of experience. He is also a member of SOCHM National Council on Indirect Taxes. He focuses on indirect taxes and allied commercial contractual issues vis-a-vis manufacturing, oil and gas, alcoholic beverage, e-commerce, EPC, mining, power and other infrastructure sector. He is a lawyer and graduated from the prestigious National University of Judicial Science, Kolkata. Suripta specializes in all indirect taxes, including custom duty, GST, state excise law as applicable on alcoholic beverages, and pre-GST laws like central excise duty, service tax, VAT, CST, entry tax, building cess, as well as related contractual aspects. So now, without taking any more time, I would like to invite Ms. Monali Datta to take the lead and carry forward this conversation in the interest of participants.
Thank you so much. So, good afternoon, everyone, and happy to be part of this presentation. So, we'll start off with a brief introduction on what has happened so far as the COVID situation has started. The first question which arises is how will industries handle its workforce? What would be the GST implications? Are layoffs the only answer? Or are there any statutory protection that the industry or the MSMEs can take recourse? And the most pertinent question which every industry is now trying to cover up is, does the state have the right to intervene in the decisions of the private parties? We first have a look at the various provisions which have come in because of the COVID-19 situation. So what are the steps that the central government has taken so far? Initially, what started with a Ministry of Labor and Employment advisory, which said that, and that was way back in 20th March, where it clearly stated that it would not terminate, employers are not required to terminate the employees, particularly casual or contractual workers, and then if there are any leaves that would be taken, it would be deemed to be being on duty without any consequential deduction. Why I'm stressing on this is that because of the fact it was only merely an advisory which started off with the central government starting off with an advisory. Then came the Disaster Management Act 2005, where the central government started with circulating orders under the DMA, and where it said that all employers in industry, shops, establishments are required to make payment of wages to its workers. And the question and the moot point here was that the DMA notification or the order only spoke about wages. It did not mention about salaries to employers, salaries to employees. So the thrust of that order was more specific on wages, and wages, when we say, it relates to workers. There were also the DMA. The point here is that the DMA conferred powers actually confers powers only to lay down guidelines or give directions. It does not per se have any right to pass an order, and that is what has been questioned in the various public interest litigations that have come before the Supreme Court now. What I've Some of the state governments also have come up with their own directions under the Epidemic Diseases Act, or for example in Delhi, under the Epidemic Diseases COVID-19 2020 regulations, the Delhi government had passed measures saying that, and it had clarified that employees of private establishments are required, if they are required to stay at home in view of the COVID-19 situation, they would be treated as being on duty and needs to be paid in full. Similarly, the government of Maharashtra, the Industries Energy Labour Department also had come up with a similar order in which, where they mentioned, and this is where the nuance is, that unlike the central government which laid emphasis only on workers, the Industries Energy Labour Department, government of Maharashtra, emphasized, and it covered both workers as well as employees. And it also mentioned that employees or workers are supposed to be given their salaries as well as allowances to which they are entitled to. Similarly, the government of Haryana also came up with its advisory, followed by other governments like government of Gujarat, etc. Now, what are the legal tenability of the steps which have been taken so far? As most of you are aware that labor is a subject which is under the concurrent list in the constitution, and being in the concurrent list where both the center and the state are competent to enact legislations in relation to the subject of labor. But when it comes to the question of having passed these guidelines or directions, interestingly, none of them passed it under the respective labor legislations. What they came up with the Epidemic Diseases Act, under the purview of the Epidemic Diseases Act or the Disaster Management Act. So, and typically the question here was that you need to pay wages because of unprecedented times that you are in. And the fact is that while all of these legislations did have the mandate of or guideline to give some compensation, it is only when it comes to labor laws, it is only the Industrial Disputes Act which talks about giving compensation as a means of wages during a period of layoff. So none other the existing legislations, labor related legislations, have that window for talking about such unprecedented times or giving the state or empowering the state to have such provisions. Whether we now next come to whether these steps have been challenged. Of course, these have been challenged, and most of you must be aware of this. It all began with the first petition being filed by Nagrika Exports Limited, which is a company in the MSME sector which was running several industries, and they had a very peculiar situation where the main thrust of their argument was that they had agreements with trade unions, and in which the minimum wages that were paid to these workers were far, far higher than the minimum wages as mandated under the Minimum Wages Act or the Payment of Wages Act. So from that perspective, the petitioner, which is Nagrika Exports, said that how is it that the center or the state has the right to intervene and and they pointed out that the question of whether is it constitutional, it's purely unconstitutional, and these were the aspects. Similarly, the last of the petitions which were filed by Ficus Pax Private Limited, and in that the Supreme Court had passed a order where it said that because this is a problem, panacea, which is across industries being faced, and let the Solicitor General hear it. And of course, this matter is being heard as we speak today. The other matters which were similar were of Ludhiana Hands Tool Association and Technoman Construction also. Of course, all of these were on different grounds, but some of the grounds which were taken were what was it? What was it that they were seeking? The industries were seeking that these are violation of a fundamental and constitutional rights, the right to trade, especially in case of an MSME which has, or any industry which has entered into trade union agreements where the workers are being paid far more superior wages than would have been agreed. And when in a situation like this where it is quite difficult for even an industry to survive, so how is it that the state can intervene and interfere in the right to trade? The other grounds that were taken was that it was merely a one-sided implementation of contract, which is not permitted. There is an increase in financial burden when the industry is not functioning. Payment of salary or wages, again, because the Ministry of Corporate Affairs had clarified that it is merely a moral obligation, so therefore you cannot trust that, and it does not qualify as a CSR expenditure. They question the limited powers of Disaster Management Act and the fact that the statutory provisions which were there under the Industrial Disputes Act for layoff, retrenchment, etc., all of that were being negated because of these guidelines or orders which are passed under the Epidemic Diseases Act or the Disaster Management Act. Has there been any relief that has been granted? So while the matters are in Supreme Court and being heard as we speak, in the meantime, what had happened was, at least in Bombay High Court, in a matter which was filed before the Aurangabad bench, the bench said that while the matters are being heard, it asks the petitioners to at least pay the gross wages for the time being. And also, the question in this matter was that what if the workers who are supposed to report to duty are absent? So are we still obliged to pay to these workers? To that, the court clarified, saying that if the workers don't report to duty or are absent, then you can take it as per law, or you can exercise your rights of treating those workers as being absent from work. There was another interesting judgment which was passed by again the Bombay High Court, in which where they said that where the court directed the Maharashtra government to at least take care of the construction workers, to migrant workers, and in fact allowed the local panchayat talukas to hear any complaints or etc. against the industry per se. So that was an interesting judgment which was passed by interim order which was passed by the Nagpur bench of the Bombay High Court. So coming to what are the measures that have been affected by the employers so far. When we talk about the measures that have been affected by employers globally, one is the first is of course a layoff, which is and when we say layoff, it comes under the purview of the Industrial Dispute Act, where we say that it is merely a temporary suspension of employees' employment for business reasons. Then we have retrenchment, which is again termination of employees, akin to which is downsizing. There are two other concepts which have not been in vogue in India, but which are being explored by employers now in India. And these two concepts are basically benching, in which where an employer, if he's unable to pay an employee because of slow business conditions, etc., then they are put aside and asked not to work. Similar is a concept which has come from UK, which is called furlough, which is a mandatory suspension of work. Now, in UK, the government of UK had released a scheme which was called the Coronavirus Job Retention Scheme, wherein employers could furlough, which means that mandatorily suspend work without pay and claim 80% of reimbursement for the wages subject to monthly caps of £2,500. Whether a similar concept, whether a relief as such has been given by the Indian government, no, that it's a big no. But yes, such concepts of benching and furlough are being looked or opted out by certain companies depending on what is the contractual obligations that they have with their employees. Now, interestingly, in all of these, what we see is that most of the employment contracts, if you see, are contracts wherein the force majeure provisions are not incorporated. Unlike other contracts across, be it a OMC contract or EPC contract or any other contracts, in manpower contracts, we do not have provisions relating to force majeure. And therefore invoking provisions of COVID-19 in the absence of a force majeure provision looks very difficult. And that is something which most employers have been struggling with given the unprecedented times. What is it that is covered under the Indian regulatory framework, Indian legal framework, so far as layoff, benching, furlough, or retrenchment is concerned? Under the Industrial Disputes Act, which is applicable only for workmen, and when we say workmen, it only means workers who have a threshold and who are workers who are excluded from a supervisory managerial capacity. These workmen, they can be laid off from the roles of the industrial establishment because of various reasons. So the IDA does have provisions, and one of the provisions is, of course, natural calamity. So layoff as a concept, as a option is there provided in the IDA. Whether it can be exercised against the backdrop of the orders of the DMA as well as the Epidemic Diseases Act is something which will depend on establishment to establishment. And why we say that it will depend on the establishment to establishment, because the fact remains that you may have trade union wages agreement, you may have your contracts which are in place, and therefore it has to be seen from a holistic perspective. So far as whether the option of layoff can be exercised or not, yes, it can be exercised under the IDA, because IDA does cover the option of a natural calamity. And as COVID-19 has been declared as a natural calamity, in fact, the Ministry of Finance, by this memorandum, has declared COVID-19 as a natural calamity, and therefore has covered in its contracts, whichever contracts are there for public procurement of services or goods, have resultantly declared that as a force majeure event. Also, apart from the Ministry of Finance diktat, there is also the World Health Organization, which clearly says that yes, COVID-19 covers under the definition of natural disaster. So from that perspective, yes, the option of layoff under the IDA can be exercised for only workmen category of workers or personnel in an establishment, and who are part of an industrial establishment. So when we say an industrial establishment, which under the IDA Act would refer to a factory or to a similar setup, and not all officers can exercise that option. The second option which is there under the IDA is basically retrenchment, which does not cover per se natural calamity, but it does say the definition of retrenchment does mention that an employer can terminate a workman's services for any reason whatsoever. So when we say for any reason whatsoever, it could broadly be construed as a natural calamity disaster is not explicitly excluded, and therefore you could come under the purview of retrenchment. However, in case of retrenchment, the whole idea is that retrenchment can be for reasons when there is no for a closure of undertaking. But yes, if there is a case where you're only benching employees or benching workmen, or because you're downsizing your operations, whether that option can be exercised or not will have to be seen from a case to case basis. Having said so, given this, interestingly, what has happened also is that while the employers had exercised the options under various provisions of the contracts or the labor wage agreements or the trade union agreements, etc., be it retrenchment, benching, etc. The fact is that there have been a lot of challenges which have come across, which employers are facing, and retrenchment or salary cuts, etc., have of course been challenged. The first of the matters was in case of the National Alliance of Journalists, where the journalists had approached the Supreme Court. The media houses had initiated retrenchment, salary cuts, as well as directions to go on leave without pay. So there were various options which were exercised, and these again have been challenged. Similarly, the Air India employees have challenged it, as well as there was a public interest litigation filed before the Supreme Court by two advocates who said that PSUs also have misconstrued the notification of the Ministry of Home Affairs stating that select additional activities will be allowed. So there have been a fair amount of litigation so far as the options which have been exercised, and it has been challenged in various courts across India. So far as actions suo motu taken by the government, while what we have seen so far is that suo motu, none of the government authorities have suo motu taken. It is basis a complaint. There have been complaints by certain state employees, certain organizations, unions, which have filed complaints against Wipro, for example, in Pune, where we had benched 300 of their employees, and which NITS, which is an organization which looks after the overall employees in the BPO facility, etc. They had filed a complaint against before the Pune Labour Commissioner, which was, and thereafter the Pune Labour Commissioner had issued a notice to Wipro requesting them for a clarification. Similarly, a notice was also issued to Tech Mahindra. This is a complaint again by NITS in relation to pay cuts being undertaken. So that has been the journey so far as the way the employers have been exercising their rights, and how the state governments have been, or the central governments have been notifying, and how they have taken action. The question that comes across is whether actions by the government against private companies, whether is it the right way to do it, whether the state or the central government can interfere in the actions of private contracts. The the fact remains that while the government may have taken action against private companies through notices issued, these steps may be susceptible and may be amenable to judicial scrutiny so far as the government's rights to enter into private contracts are concerned. Please appreciate that so far as employees or employees who are at a higher threshold of their salaries, etc., are concerned, but typically these contracts are private contracts, okay, between the employer and the employee, and in case when an employee is getting benefits which are far more higher than minimum wages or set out, whether the state still can have its diktat is something which the courts have time and again said that the contract between the parties in a contract in the realm of private law, and which, if it is not a statutory contract, then the government cannot or the state cannot intervene. In a judgment way back in 91, the Calcutta High Court had said that if in case if there is a no if there is a dispute which flows from a private contract between an employer and employee, and the conditions or are not governed or controlled by any statutory provision, then the state cannot interfere to that extent. So there have been jurisprudence to the extent that on what grounds can the state interfere. There are only limited interferences that can happen. So from that perspective, it will be interesting to see how will the Supreme Court or the courts handle such kind of situations where we are in, where there needs to be a balance between equity as well as fairness, both from an employer's perspective as well as an employee's perspective. So far as other measures which have been taken by the government in relation to labor welfare, the previous discussion that we have had was merely on the fact that what were the various options. But apart from that, there have also been some measures taken by the government in relation to providing the laborers some additional benefits. So the first of it was under the Building and Construction Workers Act, where there is a cess fund which has been collected by the labor welfare boards, and this has been allowed to be released to the construction workers who are already registered with these construction welfare boards. Similarly, the government of Haryana also had come with an interim relief in the shape of having 1,000 per week per family provided to construction workers. So apart from that, there are also been some relaxations for the employers insofar as the labor compliances are concerned. For example, the government of Gujarat had relaxed the provisions relating to renewal of licenses and had given time to apply even after 15th May for fresh renewal of licenses. Similarly, in the last few days, there have been further relaxations announced by the government. There have also been relaxations relating to ESI contributions, EPF contributions, and the government paying for EPF for MSMEs, etc. So these are some of the welfare measures which have come up by the government in relation to labor welfare. We then come to the second part of the whole discussion, and that discussion is basically the recent ordinances or the exemptions which have come, which have been meted out to various industries. Before we begin with what the exemptions or it, please appreciate that there is a lot of talk going on about having a unified labor code. The finance minister has recently mentioned about the having a unified labor code. So this concept of having a unified labor code is a pet project of the present government, and this has been in the talks for the longest time. They have come up with a code of wages which was unifying the minimum wages act, the payment of wages and the bonus, etc., which they have codified and put it under one legislation now. Similarly, they are trying to also have many other legislations which are similar in provisions, etc., to be combined into one. So this whole concept of having a unified labor code is a concept which has been there even prior to the COVID-19 situation, and that is not something new which has come up. However, having said that, given that the states also have powers under the constitution to exercise their rights so far as labor legislations are concerned, so there have been in the recent past few weeks a lot of exemptions so far as labor law provisions are concerned. And these are also arising out of the COVID-19 situation because of the industries, businesses being locked down for the longest time. And in order to ensure that economic activity picks up, the governments, the state governments in their wisdom thought that it is imperative that certain relaxations are being made to various industries in order to ensure that economic activity as well as manufacturing production picks up. So let us have a look at some of these exemptions which have which has come up in the recent days. The first of it, in fact, Uttar Pradesh was actually the second after Madhya Pradesh, it had come up with the ordinance so far as temporary exemption from certain labor laws are concerned, and it's called the Uttar Pradesh Temporary Exemption from Certain Labor Laws Ordinance 2020, and where it says that all factories, establishments, industries would be exempted from all labor laws for a period of 3 years, except in relation to provisions relating to safety, security, compensation being paid, and workers' work timings have been increased from the mandatory 8 hours to 12 hours. Then provisions of relating to employment of labor and women and children are supposed to be kept intact, as well as provisions relating to payment of wages, where wages are to be made timely. That also has remained intact. Similarly, the government of Maharashtra, also the Directorate of Industrial Safety and Health, also had come up with similar provisions relating to working hours, weekly holidays, overtime, and these are aspects which across states have been enabled in order to ensure that the work hours, etc., are extended from the mandatory 8 hours to 12 hours in order to assist the economic activity to flourish or pick up. Flourish is won't be the right word, I suppose, to pick up. The government of Gujarat also has come up with certain provisions exempting factories from weekly hours, daily hours, and also importantly, wages being paid for the same proportion. So if wages are for 8 hours are 80 rupees and proportionate wages for 12 hours would be 120 rupees. The government of Madhya Pradesh also has come up with a notification wherein they have exempted various industries which are registered with under the Factories Act and shall now be exempted from provisions under the ID Act for the next 1,000 days. And so far as the government of Madhya Pradesh is concerned, we see that their amendments have been far more thought through and have actually been done in order to ensure that the provisions are very unified and clear, unlike some other states which have not been able to be clearer. In, for example, Uttar Pradesh, although has come up with their exemptions, but there needs to be far more clarity in what the exemptions are. When we talked about these exemptions whether these exemptions are feasible or not, in reality, these exemptions, while are very good and in fact will help assist in picking up economic activity, the fact of the matter is that there are provisions in relation to health as well as safety, etc., which will be required to be still looked into. For example, in case of disposal of waste and effluents, while Factories Act does provide for clear provisions in relation to disposal of waste and effluents and how safety has to be mentioned, how safety also has to be ensured. The fact of the matter is that there are other legislations also which covers these aspects in relation to safety and health related provisions. For example, the environment laws, as well as the law of torts, where the jurisprudence has been very clear after the Bhopal gas tragedy that there is a strict liability so far as any enterprise which is involved in a hazardous or inherently dangerous industry. So from that perspective, these exemptions, whether it will stand alone just because they have been governed under the relevant labor legislations will have to be seen holistically, as well as the entire 9 yard has to be seen, because it's not only the labor legislations which are in picture so far as safety, health, etc. are concerned. Other legislations also come into the picture. Another aspect which we have seen is that in case when a exemption holiday for a certain period of years are announced, then what happens in to cases where there are contractual rights or there are notices issued by the labor authorities, so far as during the time when this exemptions are in play. Uh, in a recent judgment by Telangana High Court, what the High Court held that since the exemptions, and this was a case where the IT/ITES industry were exempted from certain labor law provisions in the state of Telangana, and in that case there was a matter in which uh, um, the petitioner, who was an ex-employee, had alleged wrongful termination and lesser payment of wages, etc. before the court. The court held that since these employers were being in the IT/ITES industry was exempted, therefore the provisions in relation to the so-called minimum wages being paid, etc., will not apply in their case. Also, when we talk about exemptions being uh, granted, we also need to see how would the contractual rights play here. Please appreciate that labor laws are in India are social welfare legislations, while the courts always try to strike a balance and have typically struck a balance between equity as well as economic activity. But the fact of the matter is that India being a social welfare legislation, if there are contractual rights which are superior, or if, for example, there is a contractual right in which the employee is being given much more than the minimum thresholds, yes, courts will always try to strike a balance between equity and economic activity. And we have seen that it is always in favor of an employer because it's the benefits that the employee earns in case of such situations are always far higher than the minimum thresholds. So to end on this section, we would say that yes, there has been a tug of war between employers and contractors, or employees, contractors, and employees. But this has made the COVID situation has made things actually grimmer, and there needs to be a balance that needs to be struck between equity and economy. Having said that, certain government measures, while initially have not been welcomed by the industry, but the recent exemptions, etc., which have been granted, hopefully is, of course, is a welcome step, and hopefully will allow the economic activity to be picked up. The third important aspect also is that employers also need to be very cognizant of the statutory provisions. While in case of employees who only have a contractual right, that needs to be seen from a company's policies, and it has to be seen from a case-to-case specific. While statutory provisions are, of course, applicable, for example, there's a Shops and Establishment Act in each state in which every employee, irrespective of whether he is a chaprasi or a CEO, has to get covered under the Shops and Establishment Act. But the contractual employment agreement also needs to be seen, because as long as an employer is paying the minimum thresholds which is there set out under the Shops and Establishment Act, then the contractual agreement will have a far more threshold so far as exercising or invoking the rights are concerned. That is one part of it. But the other part also has to be seen is that all employees or all workmen cannot fall into the same category. For workmen category of personnel, the treatment of retrenchment, leaves, or layoffs or salary structure will be very different from the treatment that are given to the employees or the senior managerial supervisory capacity. So it's a balance that needs to be struck between what the statutory provisions are there, what are the buckets of personnel or workmen that are being seen, and of course what is the overarching provisions that are there, not standalone labor related legislations, but yes, overarching other legislations which may come into play, for example the law of torts, or for now we are seeing the DMA, the Disaster Management Act, or the Epidemic Diseases Act. I now hand over the baton to Sudipta to discuss on the GST issues in the employer-employee context.
Thank you, Monali, and very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We will quickly talk about some of the key issues that arise in the context of GST in the employer-employee context. If you can move to the next slide, Monali.
Yes.
So one of the first points, or one of the first topics that needs to be covered, of course, is the unfortunate instance of termination of employment. Clearly, I mean, Monali touched upon many variants and examples of that, and the employment law related aspects of that. From a GST side, if employee, if an employment contract is being prematurely terminated, typically in that unfortunate circumstance, it comes with some sort of a compensation, whether in the form of 1 or 2 months salary or some other ex gratia payment. And the question that often arises is that a consideration for a service of tolerance? Because bear in mind that both under service tax law as well as GST law, agreeing to the obligation to refrain from an act or to tolerate an act or situation has been deemed to be a taxable service. Thankfully, this was an issue that was covered under the Education Guide to Service Tax that were issued in 2012, which has been quoted with approval by Madras High Court in the case of GETND. And have very categorically clarified that no, this is not a transaction that is liable to GST. This is any such amount that is paid by employer to employee are treatable as amounts paid in relation to services of employment in the course of employment, and to that extent not liable. However, they make a carve out for amounts paid for things like non-compete, especially at a senior level employee. He may have a non-compete obligation when her employment gets terminated, and for that he or she will get a specific amount. So that amount may be made liable to service tax, earlier service tax and now GST, by treating it as a service of tolerance, because this indeed is something that goes beyond the contract of employment. Moving to the next slide, we will talk about the reverse of this scenario, which is the situation of notice pay. So even in these times, especially in the sectors that are badly hit, whether it's aviation, whether it's hospitality, there are employees who are desperately looking for jobs to a not so badly affected sector, and many of them, a significant number of them across the country, will succeed, God willing. In many of those cases, there will be a scenario where an employee may not be able to serve his or her full notice period. Typically, the employment contracts will provide for amount of payment on account of non-fulfillment of notice pay. And this is not a new issue. I think this is an issue which has been debated ad nauseum since service tax, negative list-based service tax came in 2012, and GST came in 2017. Fortunately, a lot of jurisprudence has emerged more recently. So as I said, the dispute emanates from the declared service category of agreeing to the obligation to tolerate something. Same language used under service tax as well as under GST. This was examined most recently in the case of Madras High Court. Monali, stick to the last slide, please. Yeah, this is the one. Thanks. So Madras High Court decision in the case of GETND India Limited. The conclusion that Madras High Court reached was absolutely correct, that this is not liable to GST. Unfortunately, the articulation, the reasoning, with the greatest of respect, I must submit, left there is room for improvement there. So let's just see what Madras High Court said here. they said that this is not a service of tolerance. GE cannot be said to have tolerated an act of employee, but has permitted a sudden exit upon being compensated by the employee in this regard. Second point, they say that employee has merely facilitated the exit of the employee upon imposition of cost. It cannot be equated to a rendering of service. And third, they say that though normally a contract of employment has to be read as a whole, there may be situations where a service emanates. But if you read these three, there is no unequivocal articulation of why this is not a service. What they ought to have done, or probably that is how it was argued, was that this cannot be a service because there is no tolerance here. Because it's coming out of the contract, a person who is not serving the notice period is well aware of the consequence of not serving the notice period. It is not a new situation that has emerged where a company is tolerating and deciding that I will not pursue action for a particular reason against a particular employee. There cannot be said to be a service of tolerance. It is in the nature of damages. It is in the nature of compensation, which cannot be in the nature of consideration for a service. Unfortunately, this was not something that was very categorically mentioned. Having said that, Madras High Court, when being a High Court decision, obviously it will have a very strong precedential value. Surprisingly, often we castigate orders from Commissioner Appeals level or the lower levels of quasi-judicial authorities for not being well reasoned enough or well articulated enough. In this particular issue, Onal, if you can go to the next slide. There are two very good orders from Commissioner Appeals in Hyderabad, one in the case of Hyundai Motor, another in the case of ADP, where they very categorically discuss why a notice pay scenario will not be liable to GST, or rather service tax. And they, in the Hyundai Motor case, they say that there is no material to show that some proposed action was actually withdrawn on collection of this amount. So this basically, and the notice pay is in compliance with the contract. Since it is in compliance with the contract, you cannot say by collecting notice pay that the company is dropping a particular proposed set of action against an employee. The next order, ADP, is even better, even better articulated. They lay down this point that everyone, it was a contract, parties understood what they're getting into. Parties know that, okay, if I do not serve the notice period, this is the suffering, but I'm agreeing to that suffering. That suffering is well known from the very beginning, and to that extent, I'm suffering that the consequence of my breach, and I'm paying for that. So to that extent, it is in the nature of damages or fine or penalty, and that cannot be characterized as a amount for a transaction, consideration for a transaction. There is a SESTAT decision from Allahabad also, but that reasoning is very, very cryptic. Just 2 lines, which I have accepted on the slide. We hold that the said recovery is out of salary already paid. Salary is not covered under service tax, and hence we allow the appeal. This obviously will not withstand higher judicial scrutiny. But I think the summary is the law and the judiciary across various levels is clear on the conclusion that notice pay recovery should not be liable to GST and should not have been liable to service tax. Moving on, Monal, if you can go to the next slide. This is an issue that I think in the COVID-19 scenario has become a very, very pertinent one. Can a company get input credit for expenses incurred for medical insurance of employees? Let's understand where the issue arises from. 17(5)(b) of CGST Act prescribes a credit restriction for health insurance with an exception. The exception is if in a scenario where it is obligatory for an employer to provide the same to its employees under any law for the time being in force. So the question arises, is it obligatory on companies to provide medical insurance? Let's examine that in greater detail. If we look at the 15th April order of Ministry of Home Affairs, there are 3 annexures to that. First annexure contained guidelines to be enforced by district magistrates. Annexure 3 was a compendium of offences. Para 21(2) in that SOP or in that guideline contained a reference to annexure 2. The guideline read, all industrial and commercial establishments, workplaces, etc. shall put in place arrangements for implementation of SOP as in annexure 2 before starting their functioning. Very critical to note this, before starting their functioning. So any operation that is shut down because of lockdown scenario before they restart, they have to follow the SOP. And if you look at SOP in Annexure 2, it's a very detailed one. There are a bunch of guidelines that have been laid down. Point 5 in that Annexure 2 is medical insurance for the workers to be made mandatory. Okay, so this would seem to be a clear mandate to ensure that insurance has to be taken. Unfortunately, Annexure 2 in entirety is missing from the MHA guidelines that got issued on 1st of May for lockdown 3.0. However, I would not put too much emphasis on this omission. We need to read these guidelines in continuum. To my mind, the way I read these annexures and I read these guidelines is, if a establishment is recommencing its functioning after the lockdown period, it has to follow the SOP that was laid down in Annexure 2. Okay. Any other interpretation to my mind, if we say that there are no SOPs, there is no government mandated policies from a health and safety perspective, despite government having enumerated the standard operating procedure earlier, I think that would be an absurd interpretation in the current context. So this is, to my mind, not fatal to the claim of input tax credit. And we can conclude that where we are governed by the MHA order, medical insurance is indeed a mandate of law because it is issued under Section 10(2) of the Disaster Management Act, and to that extent meets the test of obligatory. But let's see some further nuances of this. Monali, move to the next slide. Firstly, the MHA notification does not, and even the GST law, they do not define the words medical insurance, health insurance, etc. However, if you if you go by common parlance, health insurance typically has a wider connotation compared to medical insurance. Health insurance would typically include pre-hospitalization and post-hospitalization expenses also. Medical insurance, it is understood to pertain to hospitalization-related expenses. So health insurance clearly is a wider connotation and would subsume medical insurance within that. I think what would be a best practice, what we can do is, from our insurance service provider, companies can probably get a letter saying that what is being obtained is a medical insurance policy in line with MHA guidelines. That, I think, should deal with issue or any debate that or any challenge that the department might pose. Now coming to some various scenarios that may arise in terms of credit eligibility. The first scenario is a company has paid annual premium between 15th March and 1st May. ITC should be eligible, no questions asked, except, and this is an important caveat, except in a scenario where the state government has come up with a guideline of its own which does not contain this. And this is not a theoretical scenario. If we look at the guidelines issued by Maharashtra of 17th April, it is more or less very similar to the MHA guidelines. Unfortunately, it does not contain point number 5, which talks about medical insurance. So it will be very difficult for establishment in Maharashtra to say that we will take the credit because it was obligatory in Maharashtra. Because, so, I mean, we can get into constitutional arguments whether Maharashtra could have taken a different stance. Disaster management is an area of law where central government's writ prevails over the state government, but it will be a long-winded litigation. And I think safe to say that there will be a lot of risk if a state-specific guideline was issued which does not mandate medical insurance or health insurance like the central guidelines do. Next point is ITC. So annual premium paid after 1st May. Okay, when the original guidelines, MHA guidelines of 15th April are no longer in place, but before restarting office. Okay, because we saw, to my mind, ITC would be eligible because as we saw, the guidelines, the SOP, apply to any scenario for restarting of an establishment, restarting of an office after a lockdown. So to that extent, even if something is taken, insurance is taken after 1st May, but before restarting of office, it should ITC should be eligible, of course, subject to a contrary state-specific order. This brings us to the point of essential services. Establishments providing essential services or essential supplies of goods or essential services, they were probably never locked down in the first place. They were never shut down in the first place. To that extent, I think unless they fall under the first bullet, where they took the first bullet, there is an error. It should not be 15th March. It's 15th April. My apologies. So between 15th April and 1st May, if they have taken in those cases for essential commodities, essential services, ITC should be eligible. Third category is where policy was taken prior to 15th April, but the COVID rider was added after 15th April for additional fee. In that case, vis-a-vis the additional fee, the credit should be available. If a comprehensive policy was already in place before April 15, definitely ITC is unlikely to be available. For employees who are covered under ESI, Employee State Insurance Act, which is basically people who earn less than 21,000 rupees as salary, ITC was always eligible because ESI is, of course, a mandate of the law. Next 2 points are critical. ITC for policies taken for members of family members of employees. Now, often a company will take a group insurance policy which will include family members of employees also. To the extent, because the law does not, MHA or the guideline does not mandate vis-a-vis family members, to that extent there can be a valid objection that department can pose vis-a-vis that expense. It will be, of course, a challenge to obtain a bifurcation because the whole purpose of a group insurance is you arrive at a consolidated number. It would be useful if some sort of a bifurcation exercise can be done because department is sure to challenge to the extent they can attribute a premium to family members. And last but not the least, if parts of the expense is recovered from employees, part of the premium is recovered from employees, to that extent ITC is unavailable because, of course, that's an expense that company has not incurred. Next slide, please. Let's now talk about some of the other typical COVID-related expenses and whether credit would be available or not. And the parameter or the legal basis in which we are discussing this is another credit restriction under the CGST Act, where goods or services used for personal consumption or goods disposed by way of gift, there is a specific credit restriction to that effect. Now let's go one by one. Companies would have spent a lot of money. Many companies where work from home was not a norm would have spent money in buying or leasing laptops and internet dongles to provide it to their employees for remote working or home working. To my mind, that is definitely not personal consumption because that's an expense the company has incurred to enable employee to perform official duties and tasks from home. It's a tool that is being provided. To that extent, it should be eligible. Payment or reimbursement of mobile bills, internet bills of employees. Now, two scenarios can happen, of course. If the bill is in the name of the employee, that reimbursement, we can't say that the company has received those input services, and to that extent, there would be no eligibility. However, there are scenarios that has come to my notice where a company would have taken connections with giving the address of the employee's residence, but the bill will come in company's name. In that sort of a scenario, it's being received by the company and the expenses incurred in the course of business, and to that extent, it should be eligible. So whose name the billing is in will obviously be critical. Expenses incurred for deep cleaning, fumigation of office premises, thermal scanning, hand wash, face mask, sanitizer, all of these have to be arranged as per the latest MHA guidelines. If you look at the Annexure 1, these are mandatory. So clearly, this cannot be said to be for personal consumption, even though it's the employees who will use them personally. But it's an expense by the company in the course of business for ensuring employees' health and safety as per a mandate of the law. And to that extent, these also should be eligible to credit. And last but not the least, free transportation to employees for their office to home commute. These also should be eligible because if you look at the latest MHA guidelines, entry 18, Annexure 1, wherever public transport is not available or it's not feasible, that a duty has been cast upon upon employers to arrange for transport of employees from home to office and back. So to that extent, this also should be a credit that is eligible at least during the lockdown period. With that, we come to an end of our slides. Monal, you can go to the next slide and we can start taking up the questions.
Yes.
You can type out your questions.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Sudeepta ji and Monali ji. And now, participants, we have already received few questions, and our expert will answer to that. And I would request other attendees to keep writing their questions in the chat box and question box, and those will be responded by the experts. So I would request Monali ji to please read out the question and respond to them.
Sure. So I think Sudipta, this one is for you. The first of the questions. It says
So I
that
think I'll just respond to that. It's the question basically is that during the lockdown period, most of the AMC work that happens uh, that has happened without manpower. So is there a rebate on GST front for the AMC work? Unfortunately, there is none. But of course, the government is coming up with several schemes and several fiscal stimuluses. So if this is something that is a genuine issue for a large portion of industry, this can be represented, and maybe the government will consider. As of now, the answer is no. We'll go to the next question.
yeah. The next question is about labor laws being the subject matter of the state. In case of a manufacturing company, if the wages are paid as per the Minimum Wages Act, please clarify whether the same can be challenged by the workers in the labor court under the COVID-19 situation. Further, a matter is also before the Supreme Court. Please update the status. I think we have already discussed this, and to reiterate, the matter is, as we speak, being heard in the Supreme Court. Of course, employees or workers have the right to challenge, but the fact is that you'll also have to see that if you're paying the minimum wages as set out under the Minimum Wages Act or the Payment of Wages Act, then you're complying with the statutory provisions per se. So I do not foresee why will it be challenged if you're paying the minimum wages, until and unless you have a contractual agreement to the contrary. In that respect, then it has to be seen how your contractual agreement is being set out. We come to the next question, which is on, since shops and establishment of none of these states can employees be sent for all such employees? This is specifically for white collar employees. I'm not clear on this question. If you can again retype what you want to say, we'll be happy to take it up later.
I think there is one question that I will take up, which is just read out. One of the cases, a person has raised an invoice for lease rent. However, the lessee has refused payment of lease rent on account of force majeure. Am I required to pay GST in regard to invoice raised? Lessor has now decided to withhold the security deposit paid by the lessee. Can the GST paid in reference to the invoice be set off against security deposit withheld? So, not in the context of employer-employee, but it's a very pertinent question nonetheless, and I'll answer it. You are right that if a force majeure is invoked in a real estate commercial leasing sort of a scenario, the service recipient may say that I will not pay, and or at least defer payment. He cannot say that I will never pay. He can defer payment by a few months. Unfortunately, because it's a continuous supply of services, the point of tax will, under GST law, will trigger for the lessor, and he will have to raise the invoice and deposit GST and file return, basically undertake all the compliances. Which is why we have been advising all clients that enter into arrangement, enter into an addendum to your lease deed in all cases, wherein you can, for these months, postpone the billing milestone. Because if the billing milestone of the contract is postponed in a continuous supply of service, the time of supply, invoicing requirement, GST payment requirement, all of those get pushed. So that, to my mind, is a more win-win sort of a scenario for payment in a commercial lease scenario. Because otherwise, as you have rightly anticipated, GST payment has to be made by the lessor. The second point is appropriation of security deposit. The moment security deposit gets appropriated, it becomes consideration, and to that extent, of course, GST becomes leviable. So that flows directly from the GST law. I think there's no sort of interpretation that is possible there. So yes, GST would be payable.
So the next question that is there is regarding, we are a construction firm and we take contracts from clients like Reliance, JSW, Vedanta, etc. So during this lockdown, should we get reimbursement for labor wages from clients? This will all depend upon the contracts that you have signed. So if there is a force majeure provision in those contracts which you have signed with your end clients, or as we call the principal employers, and there are force majeure provisions incorporated therein. So the force majeure provisions would have triggered by now. So accordingly, you will have to evaluate each of your contracts from that perspective and see whether you can whether your client has invoked the force majeure provision or you have invoked. How is it that the force majeure provisions in your contract are? Typically, all construction contracts will definitely have a force majeure provision. If it is not there, then you will have to take recourse so far as the statutory provisions are concerned. So there's a question from Vishnu. I have a question relating to compensation structuring, which is not clear.
I will take one question on GST that has come up. How long can one continue to take this credit? Lockdown is getting lifted in phases in different parts. It's not being practically feasible to keep track. Can one take a position that as long as Disaster Management Act is applicable, one can continue to take the credit? So different answers for different things. On the insurance part of it, I think I have laid down all the scenarios. So if one has paid the premium after 15th of April, but before reopening, just after lockdown, to that extent, I think credit should be eligible, subject to a contrary, guideline from the relevant state department. Credit should be eligible. Apropos other expenses that we saw in terms of fumigation, office, various sanitization expenses in the office, transport, etc. They would be eligible only to the extent I think lockdown persists in the relevant area. Because if there is no hassle, if there is no restriction on movement, if there is no restriction on coming to office, obviously those requirements will end, and to that extent credit eligibility will also go away. So I don't know if we can take a blanket statement that till the time the Disaster Management Act is in place. That can be a starting point, but also we need to look at state specific and area specific legislation, because of course containment zones have a different different guideline, orange zones have a different guideline. It is difficult practically, I completely agree, but if we are taking the credit, we need to be that much more careful, because we are taking a benefit to that extent. Or alternate is we represent to the government that they issue a clarification or issue a removal of difficulties order, wherein credit is eligible on these expenses incurred from say 1st of March to 1st of June or whatever. So that can also be a solution which will save all of us from getting into this minute nitty-gritty level detail.
Okay. So I think the Supreme Court has stayed the MHA circular. That's what is the update for now. The court has asked the government to give its response. Until then, as I see it, what the courts have said is that until then there should be no coercive actions taken against any private firms or factories because of non-compliance or non-payment of wages or salaries to the workmen. So for now, there is interim relief for the private firms as well as factories, and let's see how it pans out. That's the update regarding today's matter when it was heard up. So we go to the next question, and that clarification has come on the question on the Shops and Establishment Act. So the question here is that since Shops and Establishment Act, none of the states provide for leave without pay, and the IDA does not apply to white collar employees, can white collar employees be sent for leave without pay when employer-employee agreement doesn't provide for leave without pay? That's a yes as well as a no. Yes, because if you have in your agreement provisions which is silent on it, the fact is that, or it is very categorical that you will be forced to go on leave, furlough, or benching, then you can exercise that option that you have. But at the same time, please also have a look at what your policies overall say, because your employment agreement would also be subject to your policies, and your employees and any individual is aware of, specifically if it's a white collar employee, would be definitely aware of the overall company's policies, etc., and how overtime billing, etc., would have been paid. Or so from that perspective, we will not only have to see the agreement standalone, but you'll also have to see other aspects, the policies, and as well as in which part of the country you are in. When you're saying that the Shops and Establishment Act is silent on it, which state you're specifying, because some states do have specific provisions regarding that. So I hope that answers your question. So far as exercising this option of leave without pay, is it that there is another structuring which can potentially be done, and various employers are looking into it on how you can pay only the basic wages, dearness allowance, so as to benefit also, so as to allow the employees to also have the benefit of the government paying the EPF, whereas not giving the other allowances. Whether it is tenable, not tenable, again will depend upon how your salary structuring, etc., is done. How is it that the benefits that you're typically able to give to your employees, how is it that you're going to pan that out? What would be the GST benefits that you would get from that perspective, as Sudipta has mentioned? So it is not that you can make your employees go without pay. There is a fair amount of salary structuring that you can do, where it is a win-win situation for both. So if you have to strike a balance between equity and economy, as I said before, then salary structuring and keeping your employees, specifically your super performers, happy, as well as not having a pinch to your pocket, is something that can be explored. But again, it would all depend upon case-to-case basis, of course. We go to the next question.
I think someone has asked how will free transportation be covered, as this is disallowed under Section 17(5), for the same reason as medical insurance, which is also disallowed under 17(5), because if the MHA guideline, applicable guidelines under MHA or under the state, it specifies that employer has to provide transportation to employees when public transport is not available or not feasible. To that extent, it becomes obligatory on the employer under the law for the time being in force. And owing to that proviso to 17(5), it should become available. And as I said, only till the time the law mandates as such. So one needs to, while taking this credit, one needs to be very cautious and monitor the relevant guidelines and laws applicable to that area and not only the country at large.
So I'm not able to look at the questions. If there is any other question from an employment perspective, you can. Yes, I am just able to get one, which is what is the legal validity of layoff, and what options are available to form business with less than 100 employees on a form with more than 2,000 employees, 1,000 workmen, etc. See, under the IDA Act, the provisions are very amply clear on how layoff will be exercised. So far as the legal validity is concerned, the IDA, the Industrial Disputes Act 1947, clearly specifies how layoff has to be done, what is the compensation that needs to be paid. So far as compensation is concerned, it will depend upon the number of employees that are there, what is their structure, wage structure. So it's not a simple answer as such. You'll also have to look at how is it that your employees who have been working from how many years of work they have done at that facility, etc. So yes, layoff is legally valid and is an option which is exercised by many undertakings, have been exercised by many undertakings under the Industrial Disputes Act prior to COVID and during times of COVID also. Some industries or some employers are still exploring on the option of layoff. So that it is a legally valid option, but on how to exercise and what would be the compensation paid for layoff, it would depend again on the number of employees, their years of association with the organization, what is the ultimate, are they eligible for gratuity, not eligible for gratuity. So there are many factors which will have to be taken into consideration before coming up with what is it, how it will work, the entire mechanism of layoff.
I think, Monali, there is one question. If the third-party contract workers are covered under ESI, should we take their insurance or not? Please clarify. I think the answer to that is it would not be required because if the workers are already covered under ESI, then additional coverage is not required. The purpose of the MHA guidelines, to my mind, is to ensure that everyone is protected and has the ability to bear medical expenses, if any, on account of COVID. So if ESI covers that, to that extent, additional insurance may not be necessary.
There is another question on GST. I think I have a question whether the 50% reduction limit as provided in payment of wages in absence of duty apply in the given COVID scenario. Is that a GST question, Sudipta?
Not. Okay. Question by whom? I'll just check that.
I have a question whether the 50% reduction is provided in Payment of Wages Act for absence from duty apply in the given COVID scenario.
No, so that's not a GST question. I think you can take it up.
No, when you're saying 50% reduction limit, where is the 50% reduction limit coming? Not clear.
So maybe the asker can type out a comment to sort of clarify this question while we move to another question. And there is one question that has been asked by Mr. Balanuru. If employee under pending inquiry or suspension cases, is there eligibility for salary during lockdown period? Monali, I think you can answer this.
So in case of disciplinary cases as well as suspension cases, that's again, as the Bombay High Court has mentioned, and I'll draw an extended corollary to that if somebody is reporting absent to work in spite of being required to work, for example, for essential services, the Bombay High Court has clearly clarified that you're not required to pay, provided that you act on it and as per mandated under law. So if I draw a corollary to that, if somebody is under suspension because of disciplinary action and that suspension period is subsisting at the time of the lockdown period, I don't think that will change any circumstances or change the suspension period as well as the emoluments that you are required to pay. There is also another interesting question. Can an employer deduct part of privileged leave since employees are working from home? The fact is that even if it is a work from home, the fact remains that the employees are working. So on what grounds would you deduct a privilege leave which an employee is entitled to? Again, the question comes back to the fact that if an employee is working, and even if the workplace is not a facility but establishment but work from home, so it, from a court's perspective, court of law perspective, it will be very unequitable that yes, the employee is working but you're still deducting privileges, etc. It could be amenable to judicial scrutiny.
There is one GST question that if there is no additional cost for inclusion of COVID-19 in medical insurance, will ITC be available? I covered this in my slide. So if the insurance policy, a comprehensive insurance policy was taken prior to 15th of April, then no ITC should be available. However, if a policy was pre-existing, but a COVID-19 addendum or a rider has been added for additional fee, to the extent of the additional fee, ITC should be available post 15th of April. I think
There's another question on, as labor laws, can we reduce the salary or defer the salary? I think I've answered this. The fact remains that it all depends upon a multitude of factors. One is whether the employee was working. Second is what is the salary benchmarking that you've done? Are you paying the minimum wages, or is it that you're paying a higher amount? So there are multitude of aspects which would look into which you need to look into consideration. The third aspect will be when you're saying salary. Salary is the cost to the company. So is it only salary, or are you talking about only basic wages plus your earner's allowance? So all these multitude of factors have to be taken when you're talking about a reduction of salary or looking into the salary aspects.
I think one question from GST side, in case of free transport facility, would it not be considered as a supply under GST and GST would be applicable? My mind, no, because it's in the course of, as long as it is free, it's in the course of employment, but we can re-emphasize that point. We can enter into an addendum on the employment agreement where we can prescribe that till the lockdown period is on, as per MHA guidelines, the company will also provide free transport facility in these areas, so that even if there is an allegation that additional supply is being made beyond the employment contract by the company to employee, that can be rebutted with this addendum. As a best practice, that addendum can be adopted. But even without that, I think there is enough legal ground to fight such a case, given the MHA guidelines, given the COVID-19 scenario. I think one last question we can take, Monali, and then we have to close the session.
Yes, so this is regarding a contractual, in case of sales team who are on contract and not on the rolls of the company, whether there is a contractual obligation in case of discontinuance of their services, whether they can claim any right of employees, and what are the precautions one must take. It would all actually depend upon, so far as contractual employees are concerned, it would depend upon your contracts. Now, also when I'm saying contracts, is it that the contracts are a one-to-one, principal-to-principal basis, or is it that you have an agent who is a manpower supplier and who in turn is providing you the contractual personnel? So in both these aspects, you'll need to have a look not only at your contract, but also the fact is that what is the level of payouts that you do, what is it that the commissions, etc., because this is more particularly for a sales team that you're looking into. The workforce is more particularly for a sales team. So from that perspective, you will have to look into the contracts, of course, and yes, if there are aspects which you have committed and which you are not now reneging from those, these will also need to be factored. So at the end of the day, it will all depend on the contract that you would have entered, either one on a principal to principal basis or through a manpower supplier.
Great.
Okay.
So I think that was
Okay.
the last. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. So on behalf of SOCHM, I would like to convey my sincere thanks to Ms. Monali Datta and Mr. Shripta Bhattacharjee for sparing their valuable time and sharing their important views on key employment, labor law issues, and GST issues between the employer and employee context. I would like to thank all the attendees and would like to inform you that we will share the presentation copy with you over the email. So with this, we'll now close the session and we'll look forward to have you with us in our next webinar. Thank you. Thank you.